Well, welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the first committee hearing of the House of General Assembly on the Education Administrative Committee. Welcome, everyone. Let's just start the day out with we'll have the clerks call the roll.
Representatives Baum, Carringer, Cassida, Sapicki, Clemens, Cochran, Darby, Gillespie, Hakeem, Haston, Lafferty, Love, Parkinson, Reagan, Vice Chairman Hurt, and Chairman White.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Let me go ahead and recognize our clerks now. We have Victoria Lundgraf. Did I pronounce that correctly? And we also, Eli Beasley will be our clerks in committee this year. And of course, Sergeant Arms Terry Van Treese is with us today. Did I pronounce your last name correct? Oh, wonderful. Okay. And I also like to, as we begin the committee, we started this last session. Since there's 1 million students, young children from K through 12th grade in school each and every day. And we have an awesome responsibility in this committee to try to work together and get things right. So I always like to start the committee out with a prayer. So let's bow our heads. Holy Father, you are in control of all things as our creator. And as we in this committee come together to look at legislation this session that will affect the daily lives of our students and our teachers and our schools, and into the homes of the parents. So we ask for your wisdom and your guidance as we move through this session. Through Christ Jesus, we pray. Amen. Members, just to begin with, and go over, we won't be in here a long time today, but we got some good stuff going on. You have at your desk Education Administration Committee procedures. Just take that and read it at your leisure. And if you have any questions, we can talk about it next session, but that's part of our order. And we've got a couple bills today. And after that, I'd like for everybody to give the attention. If you remember 2 years ago, we passed a bill called the Education Recovery and Innovation Commission, where we set up a commission of, Ms. Scarlett, 9 members. Nine members. We asked them to look at, and they've been meeting regularly with some very qualified people there. Where does Tennessee education need to go? And there was a 2-year commission. They have come back with a report. They're going to give us that report today. As a result of that, we've got about 6 pieces of legislation that we're filing of their recommendations. So we appreciate their work. So they're going to give us that report and talk a little bit about those legislations. So we're going to have that. Does anybody have an announcement or comment you want to make? I need to recognize you before we begin. See no one? All righty. Let me make a couple of introductions real quick. In our office, my assistant, when you call down so you know who you're talking to, Payman Bedahi, right back here. We have an intern office. Her name is Heather Dugan, also. Of course, you know Katie Robertson. She's our legal counsel on my left. And Patrick Boggs, our research analyst, is with us also. So I want to make sure you knew them when you call our office if you need any questions or get anything worked out. Let's just jump right into we had 3 bills on the calendar. HB 1207 by Ron Gant has been, Leader Gant has been taken off notice. The second bill, House Bill 1174 by Representative Baum, you are recognized on your bill. A motion and second, you may present your bill.
Thank you, Chairman White. This is a bill that would provide some funding for growing school districts that need to build new schools. Currently, in the BEP funding formula, there's no direct additional allocation for building a new school. If a school district will currently receive their BEP funding from the state, and if they go from deciding not to build a new school to deciding to build a new school, that change in decision won't affect their funding from the state at all. And yet we have some school districts that are growing, and some are growing very fast. We have some in the state that are adding 1,000 or more new students to their system each year. If a school typically holds about 1,000 students, then You can do the math. This means some school districts in this state are needing to start construction on one new school every year perpetually. This bill would provide $30 million in one-time money to be allocated to these growing school districts through a grant-making process. The application process and the awarding would be developed through the Department of Education. In order to be eligible for one of these grants to receive funding for a new school, the school district would only need to have grown 2% over the prior 5 years. This funding would come from outside of the BEP funding formula. It would be in addition to that. And since the requirement would be only a 2% growth over the last 5 years, there's all kinds of different LEAs that would be eligible for this funding. Suburban LEAs, rural area LEAs, certainly urban LEAs. In fact, we've done the math and determined that 39 LEAs would be eligible for this grant funding through this bill. And I have informally done a little further investigating to see that of these 39 LEAs, I believe that they are in 14 of the 15 committee members' districts on this committee. Just to illustrate, some representatives represent multiple school systems. The 39 LEAs that would benefit or potentially benefit would be in 14 of this committee members' districts. This is a one-time money funding outside of the BEP funding formula to help school districts who are faced with the financial pressures of needing to build new schools.
Thank you very much for the explanation. And if to start the conversation out, I have had a conversation with Representative Baum, is that this is a carryover from last session. And this year we now have the BEP rewrite before us, and this is really a part of that discussion going on. I have suggested to Representative Baum that instead of this being passed out and sitting behind finance there, that possibly we put this on the end of session special calendar and see what comes out of the BEP right. And if not, we can bring this, it's still alive, and bring it back up. So anyway, I would like to have your comments if you're agreeable to that, or anyone else want to weigh in on that. Representative Pickey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And being one of those districts that has tremendous growth, like Representative Bond has spoken of, I think this is something that we can do by sending it to the special calendar. It allows us to see what the governor's proposal is going to be for growth, because he has tipped his hat a little bit that there's going to be something in there for counties that are experiencing a lot of growth. And hopefully we might be able to accomplish that through the BEP. But if we can't, if we send this to the special calendar, it allows us to reach back and pull this back out as a tool for us, held right here, that we can amend this or move this any way we want, maybe having to increase, in Rutherford County, they're building high schools that are $100 million. Murray County just building a school for $70 million. 30 million is not going to go that far, but it could be a start, or maybe we might have the assets available to increase that. So if you made that as a motion, Mr. Chairman, I would second that to send it to the special calendar so we can hold this here in case we need it in the future.
Okay, we have a motion and second on moving to the special calendar. Any objection? We had to go back to the sponsor of the bill.
That's fine with me. Thank you.
Okay. Any objections? Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of moving to the special into the session calendar, special calendar, indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Item 3, House Bill 1020 by Representative Potts. Motion. Second? Do we have a second? Okay. Do we have the representative here?
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Representative Love?
I don't know if it's too early to start. Can we roll this one?
We're out of rolls.
For this, it's just January. How do we?
This is held over from last session.
Okay, I see. How many did he have already?
3.
So this goes back to the clerk's desk? Okay. All right.
Representative Reagan?
I move to move this bill to our special last calendar.
Got a motion and a second. Any objection? All those in favor of moving to the special last calendar indicate by saying aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Moves out. Moves to special last calendar. Okay, that's our three bills. Members, now I'm going to bring up Ms. Scarlett and your team. If you will come up and excited to hear the presentation from Eric, the Commission on Education, Recovery, and Innovation. And members, if you will give them your attention. And Ms. Scarlett, if you want to introduce everyone, you may now begin.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman White.
We're out of
Um,
session.
This commission consists of 9 members, as Representative White mentioned earlier, 3 appointees from the governor, 3 from the lieutenant governor, and 3 from the speaker. We've got a physician, we have business leaders, we've got nonprofit leaders, we have educators. We have an amazing group. 6 of us are here today. I'd like to introduce Superintendent Joey Vaughn, who's our vice chair, Dr. Yolanda Jones, who is president of not 1, not 2, but 3 TCATs.
Terry, would you move your mic a little closer to the, yeah. Thank you.
Is that better? Perfect. I also like to introduce Mr. Glenn Swift. He is a retired director of MBA programs at the UT College of Business. Mr. Frank Rothermel, who is the president of Denmark Construction, and Dr. Marie Chisholm Burns, who's the dean of UT Health Science Center at the College of Pharmacy. So I appreciate everyone being here. This commission is charged with addressing the gaps and modernizing the state's education system and kindergarten through to career. And just to level set where we are right now, just basic context here. The TN Ready proficiency and Ready Graduate. So Ready Graduate is a metric that's used by the Department of Education to determine whether a student is ready after high school. Those rates suggest that actually the overwhelming majority of students in this great state are leaving high school unprepared for life after. The state's economic and workforce needs are changing at a very rapid growth. You can look out the windows of this building and see that, but it's happening all over the place. And many of our adults lack the skills and the credentials necessary to fill those demands. It makes it hard for us to grow as a state if we don't have the prepared workforce. The pandemic and the natural disasters of 2020 and 2021, if you count the continued growth of COVID and the additional natural devastations we've had over the past year, have created unprecedented disruption in education from kindergarten through to the career space. It will hinder a lot of pipeline growth for years to come. When the world seemed to shut down in spring of 2020, the General Assembly created Senate Bill 1974, which established this commission. I'm not going to read what's on the rest of this slide. I'm sure that you can, at your leisure, read this. I will ask, were you able to pass this out? Okay. All of you should have in front of you an ease of use document. I would call this the cup of coffee document. There's actually a 50-page document that goes along with this and a 50-page appendix. It's more like a pot of coffee document, but it will walk you through an obscene amount of data that we reviewed. We want to walk you through where we've been. So to date, it would be good if to date, the commission has studied numerous education policy topics and issued 2 reports. In our first year, we reviewed and compiled data that existed from what we understood from the spring of 2020. And looking at that data landscape and understanding what really were the effects of education on our students. We didn't get all the information that we wanted. We did continue to actually survey superintendents across the state, and the majority of superintendents responded to a survey to understand how were they being equipped, how are they surviving through this COVID situation. Received a lot of good information there. The preliminary report looked at an understanding of what the COVID pandemic and other natural devastations of 2020 had on the education system. And like I mentioned, we didn't have a lot of that data just because we weren't testing a lot of students and we didn't have a lot of information coming in from the districts. We did provide that, and we did identify at least 4 buckets that were kind of identified as needing further focus. learning loss, so we might consider it learning acceleration, well-being of the students and educators, post-secondary and career preparedness, and technology gaps. Year 2, Commission studied a wide range of education policy topics. We engaged with a variety of stakeholders, about almost 20 different stakeholders, content experts, policymakers, educators of all different types. And we analyzed the 2021 TN Ready data as well as other data from THEC, Tennessee Higher Education Commission, to continue understanding what have been the effects on students. One of the things that was provided was an appendix. This was electronically provided, an appendix to our year 1 report. And that really looks at additional data, breaking down what sort of effects COVID has had on the students. This second report, there's almost 60 recommendations that are provided in this report, and it goes across 9 different priority areas. We're not going to walk you through 60 recommendations because we'd be here for a very, very long time. We have pulled a few out that we're going to walk through today. Before we get into that, we'll talk about year 3. So we're at the last 6 months of our commission of being together. We're going to continue to study and optimize the recommendations that we've already provided. There's certain key topics that as a commission we were not able to address this year, and we will be addressing that in the next few months. The Representative or Commissioner Chairman White mentioned this earlier. The recommendations that were made in this document is really a legislative menu. So these proposals can be implemented at a variety of times. They're not necessarily reliant on each other, but we did that on purpose to ensure that there's plenty to look at and to choose from your perspective. The recommendations are, in many cases, are pretty innovative. We'll talk a little bit about redesign of high school, rethinking how we can engage with the post-secondary space. In some cases, it's just about good governance. It's basic common sense that we saw as a gap. In all of these recommendations, the commission always kept the focus on the students first and foremost. We always went back to that filter. Is this good for the student? The commission's year 2 report included nearly 60 recommendations aligned to 9 priorities. But we first started by creating a vision. We wanted to ground ourselves in the direction we were going as a commission, because as you could imagine, education is quite a large policy potential space. We wanted to make sure we were very grounded. The vision that we created is that every Tennessean will have a high-quality education necessary for life. There's not one size fits all in this vision, but it is identifying the fact that we've got a very big variety of different types of unique needs for every student, and we need to be conscious of that in the new modern education system. The 9 priorities identified in year 2 start with a very basic way of looking at things, and it starts with literacy and numeracy. I'll remind you all that we started our conversation a year ago. I'll also remind you a year ago, you were probably sitting in here having a special session about literacy. We applaud that work. We spent a lot of time looking at the policy that was finalized in that session. We also looked at the fact that we'd have the same sort of challenges with numeracy, if not worse, when you look at the actual data. We addressed learning, remediation and acceleration needs are also included in this, strengthening, retaining, expanding, and diversifying the state's education professionals. We've had a lot of conversation about this. Diversifying and ensuring that we have teachers match what the student body looks like is very, very important. We also completely recognize the fact that we have a pretty big gap when it comes to any educator coming into the school. And that is it's a cultural challenge across the entire country. It's not just in Tennessee. And to equip schools and districts to address students' well-being needs. COVID has really put a big giant light on the fact that many students, and even educators for that matter, are not necessarily equipped to be able to work through large challenging situations like this. Optimizing capacity for flexible, high-quality school options and redesigning high school. This is a little bit more on the innovative side, and it's rethinking the way we all grew up in high school and thinking about what's going to be needed for the future for our students. Streamlining post-secondary systems and strengthening alignment across those systems between K-12 and post-secondary. We saw a lot of gaps in what currently exists. And then finally, incentivizing locally led innovation. Most of the innovation we believe in our conversations really can be created mostly from a local level because the local communities understand more what's needed in those communities. These are the priority areas that we identified. And again, you can follow along in the ease of use document as we walk through these. These ease of use document in front of you should have some highlights. I believe it starts on page 8 or 9. Start with the first one. Ensure students master literacy and numeracy. Again, we applaud the work that the committee put in last year, the General Assembly put in last year with the special session tied to literacy. We also believe that we need to establish rigorous and periodic evaluation of those early literacy programs by independent evaluators. And we suggested, and it's just a suggestion, that you might consider looking at the Office of Research and Education Accountability to help you out with that. There's a lot of conversation about what has already been put in place and what is not. Again, we started this conversation a year ago, and I know the Department of Education does have some external evaluations in place. We just felt there was a potential opportunity for more accountability from this committee. Second one here is to fund Tennessee's K-12 system. Again, we had no idea we were going to go into a 90-day process of evaluating the way we fund schools, regardless, because that did come up in our conversation, and many of us sit on those subcommittees. We do believe that there is a need for us to fully fund and support students in all sorts of environments.
Fully funding. So fully funding the education program in Tennessee is something that I know that's been on your radars for quite a while. Actually, for the last 30 years, the basic education program has been in place, and the review committee for that is in place, and it's well represented. By statute, they meet yearly, and some of the things that we have found are things that they're also recommending. So first of all, fully fund school-based nurses, counselors, and social workers in line with the BEP Program Review Committee and their recommendations from 2021. Nurses, BEP currently funds nurses at a ratio of 1 to 3,000 students. Across the United States, Department of Health and Human Services recommends a ratio of 1 to 750. That change would increase state expenditures by $4.2 million and 948 nursing positions. I can tell you, any nurse working anywhere right now is overwhelmed. School nurses are, I can't imagine not having a nurse in my schools right now. We're doing COVID tests, we're no, we are working through the process to make sure everybody is as healthy as possible. Counselors, BEP funds an average of the ratio of 1 to 500 for grades K-6, and in grades 7-12, it's 1 to 350. The American School Counselor Association recommends 1 for 250 students. This change would increase state expenditures by $67.4 million and add 1,544 counselors. When we look at a high school redesign coming up, our high school students, our middle school students, school counselors are being asked to do things now in a different role, but we also need people that can help them get to college, get to post-secondary opportunities, get into the workforce. There's a lot more to it today than there was years ago. Last but not least, social workers. BEP funds social workers at a ratio of 1 to 2,000 students. The prescribed ratio is 1 to 250, which would increase state expenditures by $149.4 million, 3,411 counselor social worker positions. I was able to bring a social worker on last year. The work that she has been able to do was invaluable to my families as well as my students. Teachers and people in schools are dealing with social emotional issues that we can't even begin to imagine as we sit here today. I won't go into specifics there, but I can promise you, if you want to talk to your directors of school, your principals, your teachers, your neighbors, kids are at a different place. So we need to take care of them to the best level that we can. The next thing to look at is to optimize the capacity for flexible high school options. One of the things that is very prevalent right now is the need to coordinate universal broadband. We're all looking at that right now. Schools across the state are in situations where we're having a hard time staffing our buildings. We're in situations where we may need to go virtual for a little bit, but without universal broadband, that's not possible for every kid every day. So that's something we have to look at. One thing the commission also looked at was requiring periodic virtual drills to ensure that if the situation arises where we need to be at home, let me tell you, teachers want to have kids in school. Teachers want to have their kids in front of them. But if something happens and we have to, having virtual drills to make sure that we can make that happen seamlessly is important. We also need to work with education preparation programs to ensure best practices are there. Every teacher that comes into the building to begin the career needs to be able to work virtually as well as face-to-face in a seamless way to make sure that the learning is not interrupted. And finally, we need to require that all curricula purchased by districts has an integrated technology-based capability so that if that does happen, there is the capabilities to continue to work with our students.
And I believe, just to kind of touch on this before we move on, I believe that many of these have legislation that is pending at this point.
Yes, and we would also like to look at the redesign of high schools to ensure that students have access to flexible pathways to college and career. The key word there is flexibility. When we look at our districts, we would like to offer multiple pathways toward post-secondary credentialing and degrees, which could include industry certification programs, micro-credentials at the Tennessee Colleges of Applied Technology, the community colleges, and our four-year universities. These opportunities would help students and allow them to have access to different pathways. And they can also look at the integration to allow students to move among these pathways if it's a great fit. So evolving funding streams to mitigate for K through 12 and post-secondary systems to also enable flexibility for our students. So we would also like to see and ensure that every high school student has the opportunity to attend a TCAT or complete sufficient early post-secondary coursework toward an institution or industry credential while they're in high school. This is a win-win for our students. We would like to expand opportunities for students to demonstrate proficiency at their own pace. And we would like to look at how high school equivalent, we could create a high school equivalent such as college level examination programs, CLEP, tied to our high schools as well. So we can also show that proficiency if a student is achieving. And I think that is a win-win that we focused on in our recommendations. We'd also like to streamline post-secondary systems to facilitate lifelong learning. Looking at creating an automatic dual admissions option for students entering two-year institutions that are partnering with our four-year institutions to facilitate seamless transfer and degree alignment. We think it's very, very important for students to use their time wisely. When they attend either a community college or university, they should not have to duplicate their efforts. This will save time, this will save money, and this would put them more quickly into the workforce. We would like to conduct full assessment and redesign of the Tennessee transfer pathways, including clarification of which 10 pathways transfer automatically between institutions without additional requirements or conditions. These additional requirements and conditions could stagnate these students. So we want them to be able to learn and be able to earn by just passing the course, which shows that they have obtained the what I would call the sufficient coursework to complete those programs. We also would like to look at additional requirements or conditions attached to transferability and incentivize four-year institutions to partner with two-year institutions and TCATs in order to advance transfer pathways. By tying all of our higher education institutions together, students, again, will not waste time, they will not waste money, and they will be ready for the workforce and career. But last but not least, we would like to encourage and incentivize students to take 15 credit hours that will improve our one-time completion rather than just the 12 hours each trimester. This will ensure that they graduate in a timely manner and be also ready for the workforce.
With that, as I mentioned earlier, we're moving into our final year here. We'll continue to study education policy topics, refine and augment the recommendations that have already been provided here. Well, we've already had a big conversation as a commission. We'll be talking a lot more about education innovation in this next 6 months or so. And we'll be engaging with a lot of educators, students, and other education experts. With that, I'd like to open it up for questions.
Okay, members, thank you so much for that presentation. As I open up for questions, just want to say, when we passed the bill a couple years ago, I always said that it's only as good as the quality of the people on it. And I want to congratulate, we had high quality people on the board, and appreciate all the time and effort y'all put into this. Members, anybody have a comment or a question you'd like to ask Representative Haston?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank y'all for being here. Dr. Jones, I like what you had to say on the learn and earn. I'm going to steal that. If you hear that in future committees, just know that you'll get some residuals from that. But I do like the idea, and the more that we can blur these lines of trying to get our students into the workforce and just streamlining that process, I'm all for that, and look forward to hopefully partnering together on some issues and see if we can do something about that this session.
Most definitely.
And Dr. Jones, since we're talking to you right now, I've got a question. Since you're with the TCATs and all, the one item, ensure every high school student has the opportunity to attend a TCAT or substantially complete sufficient early post-secondary. It seems like where the challenge is, we're pushing dual enrollment to the high schools, and we're working on CTE, where a student can come out of 12th grade really with either a technical degree or well on the way to go to a TCAT or a community college. It seems like when I talk across the state, though, where the weakness is back in the K through 12. It's either marketing or something. A lot of young people don't know what they don't know. If you got any advice on our K through 12, how we get this message out to our students?
I think I would say to make sure that they are aware that our TCATs are a viable option, especially when you're looking at workforce readiness and success that our students see. Through this recommendation, I truly feel that students, once they know that it is a viable option, and we work with our counselors, and not only our counselors, but our parents, we must educate everyone to let them know that career readiness is success. No matter what the job is, if you're making a livable wage and you're able to take care of your family, and our industries are right now coming to us pleading, how do we get a highly skilled workforce? We must look at high schools right now. We must be able to prepare our students in high schools. So if we give them the option to complete a technical program in high school, they then have a new option. They can transfer to a community college or university.
And since you're West Tennessee TCAT, is there any things that are coming your way since the Ford Motor Company has announced that's you didn't see coming, or are you working on things now because of this new opportunity?
We are definitely working strategically because we need a not only our existing workforce to cover our companies that we currently serve, we have a huge push to be able to train a highly skilled workforce for Blue Oval City. So right now, it will take all of our higher education institutions working together, but also including our secondary institutions, because that will be a pipeline that will continue to flow that are currently not in the workforce.
Thank you.
To add on to that too, and it's a pretty important point that we had a lot of conversation about, is currently the way the financial model is set up for K-12 is that the K-12 system receives dollars based on students being in seat. What we're talking about here is rethinking the fact that students could potentially graduate early. But it becomes really important, kind of big part of our conversation is that we don't want to disincentivize high schools from allowing students to progress to whatever direction might take them. So if they're able to graduate early, we currently, in our current system, would disincentivize high schools from doing that because they get funded based on each pupil. So creating a system where they can still receive the funds could actually be an incentive for those schools, just because then they can make those funds used for something else inside the school. There's a variety of ways to consider that, but that was a pretty large conversation because we certainly would not want to disincentivize high schools to allow students to progress at the rate that they think makes sense for them.
Thank you. Representative Clemens? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And a lot of this sounds great. Of course, there's a lot of money attached to it, which, you know how that goes up here. And we're about to have a huge school funding debate. I think it's going to be big over the next couple of months if the administration has its way. And a lot of this stuff is important, and a lot of this stuff should be at the heart of that conversation. And so, as I don't know what it says about me, but I prefer the pot of coffee versions of these types of things. And it says that it's not due until June 30th, 2022. So I think you spoke to this at the outset, but is it going to be available, or is it available now?
It is available now. So
Okay.
we've produced the Pot of Coffee 1 and Pot of Coffee 2, which would actually be the full report, is a 50-page report. In addition, there is a 50-page appendix. So it's a plethora of reading, but there's a lot of really good information, and I can make sure that you receive that electronically.
Yeah, that would be great, because I think, you know, like I said, there's a lot of great things in here. Of course, the devil's in the details in most of this stuff, and as well as the funding. And I assume the appendix is full of data and evidence-based stuff. So that's what is also just as important. So thank you for that. And I look forward to receiving it. And hopefully it is influential and it does guide some of our discussions that we have here over the next few months. Thank you.
Representative Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this question is about the social workers, counselors, and is the anticipation that they will also help students who are trying to finish high school early and may need some guidance on how to make that transition out of high school early. Would you anticipate that as something that they would also be doing?
Yes. Excuse me. Yes, sir. That was one of the key focus that we had, was making sure that students had that layer of support to try to help them identify resources as well as possibilities. Sometimes our students may not know what opportunities are out there for them. So that would be the role of these career counselors.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate this very much, because I think that along with the dual admission for a student prevents that pause when the student might finish from the 2-year college and then trying to apply to the 4-year. And anytime that we can keep them moving consistent, I think is appropriate. So thank you for including that in the process.
Representative Cochran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I had just a few follow-up questions. You'd mentioned just in studying the issue that it was clear that our students were not prepared when they got to that post-secondary level. I think that probably reinforces what a lot of us have been thinking, that there were some issues there. When you discovered that, I'm sure there are mounds of data that you looked at. And so one of them maybe being the amount of like remedial classes that they took. Is that something that you based that your finding on?
We had a lot of conversation about how do we accelerate learning given the current circumstances. The current circumstances alone, prior to COVID, we also had some challenges. And so there are recommendations inside the broader document that does get into the details of the kind of accelerating that learning and remediation, not only starting at a very early grade level, elementary level, but certainly in high school. And it's impossible to be prepared to go to college if you are not able to read and do math. And so that remediation became a big point of conversation, quite frankly. There's a great program we have in Tennessee called the SAILS program that does help students once they graduate from high school, but it's only a piece of this pie. And so remediation really has to start at an early level. One of the conversations we had is about using data to set trigger points in place where if a student is not prepared at an early stage, that remediation starts not after graduation, but in freshman year or even 8th grade year, if it makes sense, so that we start stopping the learning loss then and start trying to inspire, because kids can feel more confident about what they're learning.
And then just one quick follow-up, if you don't mind,
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman. Well, and again, just kind of in doing the research, I wasn't sure what data points you were looking at, but did you analyze at all the number of Tennessee students who graduated from high school, went to a college or university, and maybe dropped out? Was that did you look at that at all?
I mean, I feel like we had a
don't-
conversation, but I don't remember if we received the data.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I was just curious, kind of
Well,
what
we
you were digging in.
also, but one of the things that I would like to add there that we did discuss is the power of a credit hour and the power of a credential. Just ensuring that every credit hour counts. In our current system, if you don't complete sometimes, if you can have 16 credit hours or 30 credit hours, what does that equate to? We want to give credit to learning and that continual learning.
Thank you very much.
Representative Pickey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this hard work in education that you're working on. Everything, and I'm following along with everything you're doing, the dual pathways, the opportunities for advancement in high school, most of that predicated on an 8th grader that can perform at the levels that we need them to perform. 7th grader, 6th grader, 3rd grader, kindergartner, right? Are you going to start to address those issues in our K through 12? Basically now it's become K through 16, fund our educational system, that we're going to have a child that starts in kindergarten or even pre-K for that matter, and will have the necessary foundations and building blocks as they move forward throughout the system, so that when they hit 8th grade and we see our proficiency numbers of the 30 percentile in 3rd grade and the 20-something percentile in 8th grade, it even gets worse in high school. Can you look at that process that we have in place from K through 8 and come up with recommendations to this committee or the other instruction committee that may or may not include ideas for insertion or ideas for deletion of things into the system to make sure that we have the foundational basics by 8th grade? That everything that we think we want to do, the dual enrollment, the dual pathways, the technical aspects of it, even the potential of serving in the military, that we can get a student by 8th grade that we know is on grade level and is functioning, so that when they get to high school, the options that we are trying to present to them is something that they can attain. And that was the challenge, I would say, is earlier the better.
One thing I would like to say to that, the General Assembly has taken some really positive steps in the last session. So, for example, the summer camps, high dosage tutoring. One thing the commission is looking at, the TCAP is optional in the 2nd grade. 3rd grade, we have scores. Every school in Tennessee has data on students in kindergarten and preschool. So one thing that the commission has talked about is being more transparent with that data. But there are some very positive things that have been put in place that need to be continued. That funding is going to be really important. High dosage tutoring started in Manchester City Schools with that program today. So I'm really excited about that, and I appreciate the work that y'all did for that. We put in the application for summer camps. It's going through. So there are positive steps, but yes, we have to identify that much sooner and work through those to help them before they get to ninth grade.
Chairman Reagan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here, and thank you for the work you've done. I listened as you went through there, and you mentioned incentives several times, but I didn't hear anything about institutional incentives or maybe disincentives for those that are failing to hit the marks, so to speak. Having done some analysis on our school system, we know there's a difference between urban versus rural. There's several other clearly identified categories of differences out there that are somehow tied to statistically definable material that we can look at. But we do not at this point in time, and I didn't pick up from your presentation, that we are offering incentives or dare I say, disincentives for those that don't make the mark for missing it or hitting it. If we have, take ACT scores as an example, which is easy to measure. There are other things less easy to measure, as my colleague mentioned. But if we have those out there and we do nothing about it, I didn't hear anything in your presentation that indicates we need to. Would you care to address that?
Yeah, we did not have very much conversation about governance or accountability at the individual school level. We were primarily talking about students. The accountability model, we did talk about the accountability model that currently exists, which has never fully been launched, which is the ESSA model. What the state chooses to do as far as holding those schools accountable is, I certainly have a personal opinion, but it's not something the commission had a conversation about.
But
Follow up?
I would like to say one thing about the accountability system. We did talk a little bit about that, but I do think that it's important to realize that districts will receive one grade. So we may do a really good job with our ACT, but we're in a year right now with where our chronic absenteeism may be high. So I may knock it out of the park with my ACT, and my chronic absenteeism is really low. And when they're averaged together, it's going to look like I'm a C, when really, when I look at my academics, my growth, the things that we're going to be almost penalized, averaging it together instead of looking at each area independently.
Excuse me, follow up?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there as far as I'm concerned. I would say all of us up here are conscious of spending taxpayer dollars and getting the return on investment that our constituents expect from those expenditures. The accountability issue, as I see it, is a key issue. Now, whether or not you say it's a district or school, it matters not, except it has to be at an effective level. So the measures that we're talking about, and really what we're talking about is a measurement issue. I would suggest that in your third session, you examine what we should be measuring, how we should be measuring, how we should be reporting it, and then what kind of accountability incentives or disincentives, as the case may be, should be tied to those. Because really that's what we can act on up here as we dole out the dollars, giving people rewards for doing a good job or less for doing a bad job, or maybe redirecting some of it somewhere else, if that makes sense. But without those measures, we're going on what people think sounds good. And in case in point, you gave us recommendations of going from 2,000 to 250 students per, what is it, counselor or nurse? I can't remember. That's great. I mean, I'm not bad-mouthing any of that, except I would ask the question, does going to that number increase the quality of the student output? When we get a student through third grade or eighth grade, does having that larger number of nurses or counselors or social workers, pick one, does that improve that number? And if we don't measure it, we can't say. So before we start adding those, and I'm not saying they're not needed, don't misunderstand me. I'm just saying from an accountability standpoint, I would like to be able to tell the constituents, the citizens of Tennessee, that money is well spent, because we figured out that going from one nurse per 2,000 to one for every 250 or whatever number you've mentioned has in fact given us a measurable result that's going the direction we want it. So I would ask you please to look at that in your next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Reagan. And I was reminded while we were having discussion from TBR system, they are marketing down to our elementary schools. Many of you may have these books already in your office. I have some in mind. They have mascots called Tommy and Tammy T-Cat now, and they go into elementary schools and they talk about the different career opportunities, that are available. And so they are marketing as far down into our elementary, which is a good thing where you have to start. So if you don't have those books, small little books that you can get in your office. Anyone else want to comment, question? Seeing none. Well, members, you will be seeing some bills that have been developed out of these recommendations that the commission has given to us. And so you'll be seeing that. Representative Love, I think you've got another comment.
And this is about the bills, Mr. Chairman.
sir.
Will there be a chance for us to maybe get the sign onto those bills before the rest of the House signs on them, like maybe the Education Committee members?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Representative Sapicki, can you address that? We've got those bills already drafted, or
And
maybe
what about for some of us who have a bill that sounds like the
Mhm.
bill that may be in finance right now that may address some of that?
Absolutely. You want to weigh in on that? You've got those. You want to weigh in on that, Representative Sapicki? Yeah. To answer the question, we'll make sure that happens. Okay.
Just, Mr. Chairman,
You're recognized.
those recommendations that came from the committee have been drafted. They are circulated. There'll be an email going out to everybody to let them know who's carrying those bills so that we can all get behind them and push those across the finish line. That's the most important. By all means, if there's something that's already gone through the test of this committee, it could always be brought back here by the bill sponsor to address that going forward. But I'm sure the chairman will make sure everybody gets a copy of who has those. I think those bills will be on the House floor tomorrow if you want to sign on to them.
Thank you. And thank you for asking that very well. Commission, y'all have any final comments or thoughts before we close out?
We thank you very much for the opportunity to come in and share this second report, and also remind you that you didn't spend any money on us because there are no appropriations for this commission. It's just making sure you're okay with that.
Yeah.
And also thank you very much for enabling the State Board of Education to be our administrative support. They have made a world of difference in helping guide this commission. So appreciate it. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you. Thank y'all. Please pass on the rest of the commission how much we are appreciative of y'all's time without pay to come up with this. Members, anything else, or can we adjourn? Motion adjourn. We're adjourned.